So maybe you're new to Magic the Gathering, or maybe you want to get more involved in the hobby, get a bigger collection going. However, you don't want to spend a lot of money because this hobby gets pretty expensive. There are definitely a lot of things you can do to minimize the amount of money you're spending while still being, I guess, efficient. Like there's a strategy, I feel like, to it. At least there are things that I've been doing and have done to expand my collection, but not necessarily make myself feel super guilty about the amount of money I'm spending on pieces of cardboard. So in this video, I'm gonna be sharing some of those things and discussing them and just kind of giving my 2 cents about the topic. So the purpose of building this collection, though, just so we're all on the same page, is to have a collection or a library of cards that you can use in other decks for the purpose of playing. Like we're not necessarily collecting just for the sake of collecting because like cards are cool or because things are expensive or whatever. This is not like investing or anything like that. This is, we're collecting to play with the cards and put them in other decks. The more cards that you're going to have in your library, obviously the more ideas you can generate and the more, I guess, variety of cards you can add to your decks to kind of spice it up. So starting a collection on a budget is really going to be dependent on your goal. Kind of like with anything in life, it's going to be kind of dependent on the individual person. However, we're just going to generalize some things because we can't necessarily give specific advice for really anybody. I'm going to assume most people watching this video are collecting for the purpose of building Commander decks, because Commander, it's a great format to play for on a budget. You get to play with all these different cards, you get to see all these different things and interactions without necessarily having to build like a competitive deck in a sense. Like a lot of the constructed formats, even like Standard or Modern, Legacy, you're not really going to be playing in a budget. So like those formats, they're fun, they're great, but they're not necessarily budget friendly. So I'm going to kind of cater this video towards Commander players, but I definitely acknowledge that there are other formats out there that people can play on a budget. So going over some do's and don'ts really quick. We're going to go into some of these a little more into detail in a second. You are going to want to buy single cards, like specifically, hey, I want that card, I'm going to buy that card. Also, when a new set releases, you're not going to be probably buying these cards or any new cards. You're most likely going to be waiting till they either come down in price, or maybe the card does get released that you want and is good for your deck and is cheap. Typically it might not align like that, but usually you want to wait till some of the cards come down in price after the hypes all die down. So just, new set comes out, just chill. You don't need the cards that badly if you're playing on a budget. You're typically also going to want to buy cards that can be incorporated in any deck that color can, I guess, represent. So a typical card may be like Lightning Bolt. Like any deck that runs red, you can put Lightning Bolt in and it's a pretty good card. Is it like the best card for every deck? No, but it works. Another example would be like Path to Exile for white, or like Counter Spell for blue. You could kind of just put this card in any deck and it kind of just works. Again, it might not be the most effective card in the game, but it's a placeholder possibly for some other future upgrade. So if you're starting to collect or building up your library of cards, having these cards as placeholders for potential future cards is good, because again, the card's effective and you can swap it in with like any other card in that deck as long as obviously the colors align. Another thing I'd probably recommend is to stick to 1 to 3 colors. If you start buying cards for every single color, you start spreading yourself really thin. Again, it kind of depends on the commander you're building and, you know, the kind of goals you're shooting for in your deck. Maybe you want to build a cube. You know, I don't know what your goals are, but if you're building commander decks on a budget, or even modern or standard decks, sticking to 1 to 3 colors, you're going to be able to kind of get a better library of cards to pull from in that, like, I guess, archetype in a sense, but I guess color. And also you get a lot more familiar within that color as well. Again, this is kind of debatable. People might disagree with that, but I would say stick to 1 to 3 colors, and then after a little while, expand to other ones. Things to not do: just don't buy booster packs or booster boxes, especially not booster packs. I know they're fun to open. Yeah, it's fun, it's great, and you can do it every once in a while, but like, if you're playing on a budget and you do have a budget, you definitely don't want to open. You're just not going to get the cards you want. You're going to get some, I mean, it's fun to get some random cards here and there, but especially if you're opening a booster box, you're going to get a lot of the same cards that you don't even want anyway, and they're pretty trash. Like I have boxes of cards that just, like, or just basically you just throw them out. They're just not good in any deck. They're just not good, and they're just sitting there. Like that money could have been better cards. So it's kind of just generally do's and don'ts of things that I would probably recommend. Now, for a strategy to buy the cards, first thing you need to do is to maybe mentally or physically put something to limit the amount or budget the amount of money you intend on spending per month. This monthly budget should include shipping and fees, taxes, all that stuff. So when you get the card, how much does it cost? Typically, just my personal preference, I spend about maybe 25 bucks a month, although the last few months I haven't really been spending at all, like any money on cards. But if I spend like 25 bucks a month, it's a hobby, it's fun. I am comfortable spending that amount of money on cardboard. Anything above that, I start getting like, okay, I probably shouldn't be doing this. But definitely before you buy any cards, you're going to want to have some sort of budget. This is also really nice because you're going to slowly build up a collection over time without necessarily feeling guilty, because again, you're putting a mental budget and you're following those guidelines that you set for yourself. This also gives you time to play with the decks and cards that you have, to see other interactions. Yeah, I guess play with other people as well, see what they're running. If you were to buy a bunch of cards up front and spend a whole lot of money, you might not exactly want all these cards, or you probably would have thought, like I've bought a lot of cards at one time and then been like, wow, if I just like saw this article, saw this other deck tech, I've been like, wow, that would have been a card, it would have been cool for my deck and I should have bought that instead of XYZ. Just things like that. So I think pacing yourself through hobbies like this is generally a good thing to follow. Again, people might think differently, but one thing I want to note though is if you don't have a deck, you shouldn't start a collection, if that makes sense. Like you should have at least one deck that you say, hey, this is a deck that I can play with. And any friend, anyone could come up to me and be like, hey, you want to play this Commander game or just Modern game? Again, depending on the format that you want to play in, but probably will be Commander. I would recommend before starting any collection, you actually have a deck that can function and play with, because that's kind of the point of the game, you know? So if you want to start playing the game, you actually don't have a deck yet, I would definitely spend maybe 50 to 100 bucks on a pretty good Commander deck. I obviously understand that we already set like monthly budgets, and if you're pretty new to the game, you're probably not even gonna know what deck you want to play or like what you want to invest your time and money into. But this is also the fun part too, because you could go watch a bunch of videos, look at a whole bunch of deck techs, you know, get your knowledge going. So I definitely understand the kind of contradictoriness that I'm saying, that you should buy a deck before you collect any cards, but also understand that you're probably new to the game, you don't necessarily know, you know, what deck you even want to play, and you don't want to put up that upfront cost. I will do actually a different video on this eventually. I started typing up some things I want to discuss on how to select your first deck and things to consider, so hopefully that helps with the process. But before you start a collection, get a good deck so you can actually play the game. You don't need to spend 100 bucks, but I'm just saying sometimes you want to, so there's some good cards out there that are really helpful in certain decks, and it's like you just spend like $2 or $3 extra on a couple cards, the deck becomes a lot more powerful and it's a lot more fun. But that is a different video. I want to go into detail on that. So we have some general guidelines to follow. We set a monthly budget. Now we actually need to go to the websites and buy these cards. You can obviously buy at local stores, and I do encourage that because you want to keep places in business. I also understand that they typically overcharge for certain cards, but most local stores have like bulk bins. You just go in there and you just search around for the cool cards. That's also a really fun way to kind of get your, I guess, mental library going of cards that exist that you may have not seen otherwise, so that could be fun too. So if you do go to your locals, I definitely recommend doing that first. It's typically just sifting through some of their cards and finding some here and there that might be kind of cool. Just typically go through their bulk bin of commons and uncommons. You're not going to find amazing things typically, but you'll find cards that be like, hey, that's kind of a decent seeming card, you know? But when you find cards you specifically want to buy and you need for your deck, I typically use I only use actually TCG Player and Troll and Toad for Magic cards. TCG Player is nice because the cards are pretty cheap. All the cards are on there. Troll and Toad is typically a little more expensive. However, one thing we got to consider is shipping fees. Shipping adds up really quickly, especially if you're on TCG Player and you're buying one card that's like 25 cents from 10 different people. They're going to charge you like 50 cents, maybe even $1 to ship it. Again, depends on the seller, but if they charge that much, that just skyrockets the price of the card. So typically if I'm on TCG Player, I'm going to be searching for larger stores or sellers that have a lot of cards, and I'm going to buy as many as from that one seller as possible. So if there are shipping fees, at least it kind of doesn't impact the whole price of the order. If you shop from Troll and Toad, they do free shipping on singles above 25 bucks. So that's pretty nice. Just definitely understand those shipping adds up. So regardless of where you buy from, I would typically buy in somewhat of bulk from one seller, or just try to minimize the shipping fees just somehow, again, depending on how you're doing it. But yeah, local game store, look around those boxes, you might find some goodies. TCG Player, try to find one seller or do TCG Player direct. With Magic, they usually do have that, but then TCG Player usually charges like $3-4 bucks, I think, to ship that, which, I mean, sometimes it's not even really worth it in my opinion. But and Troll and Toad, 25 bucks and above, they do free shipping on singles. over time implementing these things, you slowly build up a pretty big collection. Like I got this 1,000 card box thing right here. This has got all of my good playable cards in it. Okay, maybe not all of them, but it's got a good amount. Like I can pull any card in here and be like, that's a pretty good card. See, Rootbound Defense. That's a pretty good card I could add to any deck. It makes things hexproof. So you pull out another random card. Dark Ritual, another pretty good card. So I can pull any card out of here, and I got it color organized and everything. So I can pull out almost any card out of here, and it'd be a pretty decent card for some deck. Obviously, I got other decks, I got other boxes more specific to certain things. But again, I didn't do this in one day. I did this in like 10 years, just slowly buying cards here and there, being like, wow, that's a cool card. I'm gonna buy that card. Well, that card's super cheap. If a card is, here's the thing too, if a card is like $1 and I'm like, hey, I want that card, that's a cool card, I'm just gonna buy it because it's $1. Now I'm not gonna buy 100 cards that are $1 just because they're $1. But if I'm like, hey, there's 1 or 2 cards that are $1, I'm just gonna buy it because I'm gonna use it in a deck. So I think there's some like mental rationale here, you know, and that's again why budgeting I think is important, because if there's like, if I haven't bought a card in like 3 months and I'm like, hey, that card's $10, kind of cool, I kind of want it. Then I'm like, okay, well, I've been mentally budgeting X dollars a month, saying I'm okay doing that, but I haven't bought a card in a while, so I'm just gonna buy that card. So you definitely gotta set some ground rules for yourself. But at the end of the day, again, it's a hobby. It's supposed to be fun, but you don't wanna ruin yourself financially. If you slowly implement some of these things I mentioned over time, I think you'll have a great collection over time. I didn't mention this, but it's probably implied is that you're gonna do research on cards. You know, you're gonna look at deck text. You're gonna, you know, play the game, look at, oh wow, that guy's got a cool card. I wanna buy that card. You know, watch some videos. Like that's how you're gonna do your research on what card you want to buy. This is more of the, how do you mentally go through like, hey, how much money should I spend, or what's the strategy and how I actually build this collection over time. I probably wanted to say that in the beginning of the video, but I always forget things. Anyway though, buy some cool cards, don't spend a lot of money. Any card under $1 is pretty spicy. If you don't have a deck yet, just buy a deck, but obviously do the research first. I'll get a video about that in the future. But anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for some more Magic videos, and hopefully you have fun playing. Take care.